The silver collar of the Crescent Pack felt like a brand of fire against Adelina's throat. But she did not drop her gaze. Before her stood Alpha King Rowan, the man who had sworn to protect her, now signing the decree of her exile with a hand that did not tremble. Framed for a treason she did not commit, she was stripped of her rank, her home, and her dignity in front of the entire assembly. "You leave with nothing, Adelina." Rowan's voice echoed through the grand stone hall, hollow and cold, devoid of the warmth that had once belonged only to her. No gold, no title, no protection from the pack. She clutched her threadbare cloak tightly over her stomach, where a secret beat with a faint, fierce rhythm. She had nothing. No pack, no future, no mate. Except for the one thing Rowan would burn the world to possess: the Alpha King's unborn heir. Turning her back on the only life she had ever known, Adelina stepped into the raging storm. The rain in the northern peaks did not fall. It slatted across the gray stone of the courtyard like shards of shattered glass. In the center of the lunar citadel, the high wolves of the Bloodstone Court gathered in a silent, predatory circle. Their eyes glowed with a mixture of cold curiosity and ancient, hard-wired cruelty. To them, a fallen high-ranking wolf was nothing more than prey that had lost its teeth. Adelina stood at the absolute center of this judgment circle, her hands bound by heavy iron links that dampened her inner wolf. The iron was cold, biting deep into the delicate skin of her wrists, but she refused to show pain. Her breathing remained even, a deliberate act of defiance against the suffocating weight of the pack's judgment. She kept her chin high, though the dampness of the storm had plastered her dark hair to her cheeks, and the wind threatened to rip her tattered gray wool cloak from her shoulders. Above her, on the grand dais of carved obsidian, sat Rowan, the Alpha King. His silver eyes, usually bright with a fierce warmth that had once belonged entirely to her during their stolen nights in the high meadows, were now hooded, distant, and lethal. The crown of jagged iron and silver leaf sat heavily upon his brow. Beside him stood Lord Cassian, his half-brother, holding a velvet cushion upon which lay the forged parchment that had sealed Adelina's fate. "The evidence is absolute," Cassian proclaimed, his voice carrying over the howling wind with practiced theatrical sorrow. "Lady Adelina has passed the defensive layouts of our western borders to the rival Frostmane pack. She has compromised the safety of the entire realm. She has sold our blood for silver." Adelina looked directly past Cassian, her gaze locking onto Rowan. She ignored the murmurs of disgust rising from the elders like toxic steam. "Rowan," she said, her voice cutting through the tempest, "look me in the eyes and tell me you believe I would sell our people to the Frostwolves. Look at me, Rowan." Rowan's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle twitched beneath his scarred cheek. For a fleeting second, the terrifying alpha authority in his gaze wavered, replaced by a ghost of the man who had held her by the fireplace just weeks ago, whispering promises of a future where she would sit beside him as queen. But the burden of the crown was a heavy, unforgiving master. The Pack Council had been demanding blood for the recent border raids. They needed a scapegoat, and Cassian had woven the trap perfectly, presenting documents bearing Adelina's personal wax seal. "The seals match your house, Adelina," Rowan said, his tone flat, stripped of all emotion. "The law of the Alpha King is absolute. For the crime of high treason, the punishment is death." A collective breath caught in the throats of the assembly. Some of the younger wolves shifted uncomfortably, remembering Adelina's years of dedicated service as the pack's chief strategist. Instead of begging for mercy, Adelina took a step forward, the chains rattling sharply against her wrists. "Then execute me, Alpha King," she challenged, her voice ringing with an iron-hard clarity. If your justice is so blind that it cannot see the viper sitting at your right hand, then my blood is better spent on these cold stones than in service to your court. Cut my throat now, if you have the courage to do it yourself." Rowan rose from his throne, his towering presence casting a shadow that seemed to swallow what little gray light remained in the courtyard. The sheer pressure of his alpha aura washed over the crowd, forcing several weaker wolves to drop to one knee. "But because of your past service to the crown," Rowan continued, overriding her words with a booming resonance, "I commute the sentence. You are stripped of your name. Your lineage is erased from the pack ledgers. You are exiled to the neutral human borderlands. If you cross into Bloodstone territory again, you will be hunted as a rogue and executed on sight." Cassian stepped forward, a smug, barely perceptible smirk playing on his lips. In his hand, he held a pair of heavy, iron shears. With a swift, practiced movement, he sliced the embroidered silver wolf crest from Adelina's cloak. The scrap of fabric, representing her entire identity, her family's honor, and her place in the world, was tossed into the mud and trampled beneath Cassian's heavy leather boot. Adelina pressed her left hand discreetly against her lower abdomen beneath the folds of her tattered garment. The secret she carried was a fragile, tiny spark. Barely 2 months along, unknown to Rowan, unknown to the council. If Cassian knew she carried the king's child, the baby would be taken and raised as a weapon, or eliminated entirely to clear Cassian's own path to the throne. She had to protect this child, even if it meant living as an outcast in the dirt. "Take the chains off her," Rowan commanded, his voice tight. "Let her walk out through the southern gate." The iron cuffs clattered to the floor, leaving angry red rings around her wrists. Adelina did not rub them. She gathered her torn cloak around her shoulders, met Rowan's frozen, silver stare one last time, and turned away. She walked down the long, muddy avenue of wolves, her head held high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her stumble. Behind her, the heavy iron gates of the lunar citadel slammed shut, cutting off the only world she had ever known. 4 months had passed since the gates of the lunar citadel closed behind her, and the northern mountains became nothing more than a dark silhouette against the sky. The neutral human borderlands were a stark contrast to the majestic, high-altitude peaks of the wolf territories. Here, in the sprawling, chaotic town of Oakhaven, the air did not smell of crisp snow and wild pine. Instead, it was thick with the scent of wet coal, roasted meats, stale ale, and the mundane, frantic bustle of human life. Adelina worked in the back room of a dimly lit apothecary, her fingers stained with the green and yellow juices of crushed silver root and marigold. Her belly had grown, a distinct, rounded curve that she hid beneath oversized linen tunics and heavy, stained woolen aprons. "You're pushing yourself too hard, child," Valerie muttered, placing a cup of warm, honeyed chamomile tea on the cluttered wooden workbench. Valerie was an elderly human midwife with deep-set eyes that asked very few questions, but possessed a sharpness that saw far too much. "The winter stores need to be cataloged, Valerie," Adelina replied, wiping her brow with the back of her sleeve. Her wolf was suppressed, sleeping deeply in the core of her soul to protect the growing child from being sensed by any passing shifters. Without her wolf's passive healing and strength, Adelina was left with the pure exhaustion and physical vulnerability of an ordinary human. "And we need more coin if we want to buy enough firewood to survive the coming freeze." "The coin will come," Valerie said softly, her eyes lingering on Adelina's stomach. She reached out, her warm, wrinkled hand hovering near Adelina's belly before placing it gently against the fabric. "But that child requires rest. The pulse I felt yesterday when I examined you, it is too strong, Adelina. It is too fast for a human babe. You aren't from these parts, and you aren't like us. Adelina paused, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had been incredibly careful, but the lineage of an alpha king could not be completely masked by simple herbs. The child's heartbeat was a vibrant, rhythmic thrum that echoed with an ancient, untamed power. "He is my son," Adelina said, her voice dropping to a defensive whisper. "That is all that matters, Valerie. He has no father, and he has no pack." Before Valerie could respond, the iron bell above the apothecary door chimed loudly, its metallic ring cutting through the quiet room. A cold, sudden draft swept into the shop, carrying a scent that made Adelina's blood turn to pure ice. Pine needles, ozone, and old copper. Wolf shifters. Specifically, trackers from the Bloodstone pack. Adelina drew the heavy velvet curtain of the back room slightly, her breath catching as she peered into the main shop. Standing by the counter were two towering men, dressed in the dark, studded leather cloaks of Rowan's elite tracking unit. They looked entirely out of place in the human shop, their eyes scanning the shelves with undisguised contempt. "We are looking for a woman," the lead tracker said, tossing a heavy silver coin onto the counter. The metal clinked sharply. He unrolled a small parchment sketch of Adelina's face, one from her days as a lady of the court, before the exhaustion of exile had hollowed her cheeks. "An exile. Have you seen her?" Valerie looked at the sketch, her expression remaining perfectly blank. The mask of a woman who had lived on the dangerous borders for decades. She turned her back to the curtain, physically shielding Adelina from any line of sight. "Many women pass through here, sir. The borderlands are full of desperate souls running from things they'd rather forget." "What did this one do?" "That is none of your concern." The tracker snapped, his nostrils flaring as he began to scent the air. "If you see her, report it to the border garrison immediately. The king wants her found." Adelina held her breath, her hand covering her belly as if she could physically quiet the child's powerful heartbeat. If they discovered her now, she couldn't run. Her wolf was too weak, her body heavy with pregnancy, and her joints aching from the cold. She waited for the inevitable, for Valerie to betray her for the weight of silver, or for the trackers to catch her scent through the heavy aroma of dried herbs. The lead tracker leaned in closer to the curtain, his nose twitching. He frowned, stepping toward the back room. "There is a scent underneath the lavender and mint. Something wild." Adelina braced herself, her fingers wrapping around a heavy brass mortar on the workbench, ready to strike. But just as the tracker reached for the cloth, his companion grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back. "Forget it, Vance. The scent here is all damp herbs and human filth. It's making my head ache. Besides, the scout from the Eastern Gate just reported a female rogue matching her description dead in the mires 3 miles north. Let's go verify the body so we can return to the peaks. I hate this damp, human air." The trackers turned on their heels and strode out of the shop, the doorbell chiming merrily behind them. Adelina sank slowly against the wooden wall, her knees trembling so violently she had to slide down to the floor. She let out a long, shaky breath, her hand resting on her stomach. She was safe for now, but the web was tightening. Rowan was hunting her, and she did not know if it was for her death or for something far worse. Back in the heights of the lunar citadel, the atmosphere was suffocating. 6 months had passed since the banishment of Adelina, and the great stone halls, once vibrant with the sounds of banquets and pack life, were filled with a heavy, rotting silence. A strange, mystical blight had crept into the Bloodstone valleys, turning the lush pine forests gray and making the crops rot in the soil before they could be harvested. Even the sacred spirit wells, the source of the pack's connection to their ancestors, had turned brackish and cold. Rowan sat on his obsidian throne, his chin resting on his fist. He looked haggard. The iron crown felt like a lead weight upon his brow, and deep shadows hung beneath his silver eyes. He hadn't slept a full night since the day he took the silver cloak from Adelina's shoulders. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her proud, defiant gaze, and heard her asking him if he truly believed she was a traitor. "The elders demand another sacrifice to the spirit wells, King Rowan," Cassian said, stepping up to the dais. He looked sleek and untouched by the hardships facing the rest of the pack, his leather armor polished to a high sheen. "The gods are angry that a traitor was allowed to walk free into exile instead of being properly executed. The land demands her blood." "Silence, Cassian," Rowan growled, a sound so deep and resonant that it shook the dust from the stone rafters above. His silver eyes flashed with a dangerous, volatile light. "I have given this pack my youth, my blood, and the woman I—" He stopped himself, swallowing the word loved before it could betray him. "I will not slaughter more innocents for a ritual that clearly isn't working. The spirits do not want blood." A heavy oak door creaked open, and a breathless guard entered the hall, bowing deeply. "Your Grace, the tracking unit has returned from the human borderlands." Rowan leaned forward, his grip tightening on the stone armrests until the rock groaned under his strength. "Speak. Did you find her?" The lead tracker, Vance, stepped forward and knelt on one knee. "The border towns were empty of her scent, Your Grace. However, we found a body in the northern mires. The face was ravaged by scavengers, but the clothing matches. It was the same tattered gray wool she wore when she left the citadel. We found this nearby, half buried in the mud." Vance held up a small silver locket on a broken chain. Rowan's heart stopped. He rose from his throne in a trance, stepping down the dais to take the locket. It was the token he had given Adelina during their first hunt together, a small silver moonstone that she had sworn never to take off. As his fingers brushed the cold metal, his high alpha senses flared, cutting through a strange, subtle magical block that had clouded his mind for months. A sudden rush of memory and raw sensory data hit him. The locket didn't smell like the decay of the mires. It smelled of lavender, mint, and Cassian's personal quarters. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The magical seal on the forged letters, the scent of treason, the absolute proof Cassian had presented. It had all been a beautifully constructed illusion. Rowan turned slowly, his silver eyes turning completely black as his inner wolf took full control. The air in the hall grew so cold that their breath began to mist. "You lied to me," Rowan whispered, his voice a quiet promise of death. He descended the remaining steps, his movements so fast he was nothing but a blur. He grabbed Cassian by the throat, slamming his half-brother against a massive stone pillar. "The raids, the correspondence with the Frost Wolves. It was you. You framed her. If you kill me, the Council will revolt." Cassian choked out, his fingers clawing desperately at Rowan's iron-hard grip. "You have no proof that will satisfy them. And even if she is alive, she is gone, Rowan. You threw her away to save your crown. You chose this throne over her." Rowan slammed Cassian against the pillar once more, cracking the ancient stone. "I will find her," Rowan roared, his voice shaking the entire castle. "And when I bring her back, your head will adorn the citadel gates. Guard!" He dropped his choking brother to the floor. "Throw him in the deepest cell. Prepare my mount. I ride for the borderlands tonight." The golden light of autumn had arrived in Oakhaven, painting the surrounding hills in shades of amber and bronze. But the beautiful colors brought a sharpening, bitter chill to the wind. Adelina was now 7 months pregnant, and her movements had become slow and heavy. Her lower back ached constantly under the weight of the child, and her ankles swelled if she stood for too long at the herbalist's table. She was returning from the outskirts of town, carrying a heavy wicker basket filled with winter squashes and dried roots, when her dormant wolf suddenly stirred within her. It wasn't a gentle awakening. It was an electric shock of pure adrenaline that made her gasp, dropping the basket. The heavy orange squashes rolled into the dirt path. Her wolf, which had been silent for months, was pacing inside her mind, growling in a mixture of intense fear and fierce, instinctual recognition. The air around her grew incredibly heavy, thick with the scent of pine needles, winter frost, and a familiar, heart-wrenching ozone from the shadow of the old willow trees at the edge of the path. A massive black horse stepped forward. Atop it sat a figure clad in midnight blue armor, his silver hair catching the fading sunlight like spun starlight. Rowan. Adelina frozen on the path, her breath catching in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her heavy body refused to cooperate. She stood her ground, her hand instinctively coming up to cover her swollen belly, trying to hide the prominent curve behind the folds of her wide woolen shawl. Rowan dismounted with a grace that felt entirely predatory. He removed his iron helm, revealing a face lined with deep grief, exhaustion, and sleeplessness. When his eyes landed on her, the terrifying Alpha King looked as though he might fall to his knees right there in the dirt. "Adelina," he breathed, his voice cracking as he took a tentative step toward her, his hands reaching out as if she were a ghost that might vanish if he breathed too hard. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice sharp and cold as a dagger. "You have no jurisdiction here, Alpha King. This is neutral ground. If you step closer, I will scream, and the town guard will be here in minutes." Rowan stopped, his eyes dropping from her pale face to her protective hands, and then to the unmistakable, heavy curve of her abdomen. His silver eyes widened in absolute shock, followed quickly by a confusing mix of anger, betrayal, and sudden, fierce possessiveness. "A child," he whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden, dark intensity. "Cassian's spies said you were seen with a borderland rogue. Is this why you sold my pack out, Adelina? To build a life with some human peasant? Is this his child?" Adelina felt a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. Even now, after all this time, his first instinct was to believe the worst of her. He looked at her, carrying his own flesh and blood, and his pride immediately painted her as a traitor who had moved on to another man. "Yes," she lied, her voice cold and steady as ice, her eyes locked onto his. "It is a human child. A peaceful child who will never know the cruelty of a wolf pack, the corruption of elders, or the tyranny of a king who cannot trust his own heart. Now leave us alone, Rowan. You have no place here." Rowan flinched as if she had struck him across the face with a silver whip. The absolute certainty in her eyes cut deeper than any blade. He took another step forward, his powerful alpha aura flaring unconsciously in his emotional turmoil, demanding submission. But Adelina did not bow. She stood tall, her eyes burning with an unbreakable maternal resolve that forced his power back, refusing to let it touch her child. The wind began to howl through the branches of the willow trees, kicking up dust and dry leaves around them as a sudden storm gathered in the sky. A direct manifestation of Rowan's turbulent, raging emotions. "I know the truth about the letters, Adelina," Rowan said, his voice dropping to a desperate, ragged plea that she had never heard from him before. "I know Cassian framed you. I found the proof in his quarters. I know you never betrayed the pack." Adelina let out a bitter, hollow laugh that seemed to echo off the cold stone of the nearby Crossroad Inn. "Now you find the proof? After you stripped my cloak in front of the people I protected? After you let your guards mock me and spit at my feet? After you threw me to the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on my back?" I was blind, Rowan roared, his control finally snapping as he took another step closer, his eyes flashing silver. The council was threatening civil war. The pack was starving from the first wave of the blight, and the evidence against you was perfect. I did what I had to do to protect the crown and keep our people from tearing each other apart. And you sacrificed me to do it, she shouted back, stepping closer to him, ignoring the danger of his proximity. A king who sacrifices his own people, the people who love him, just to keep a crown on his head deserves neither the crown nor the pack. The land is dying without you, Adelina, Rowan revealed, his voice cracking with a raw, agonizing vulnerability. The spirit wells are poisoned. The crops are rotting in the dirt. The elders say your ancestral bloodline is the only thing bound to the ancient guardian spirits of the valley. Without you, there is no Bloodstone pack. I need you to come back to the Citadel. The pack needs you. Adelina stepped back, a fierce, protective instinct overtaking her entire being. She pulled her shawl aside completely, revealing the full, heavy extent of her pregnant belly. You want me back for my blood? She hissed, her voice dripping with venom. To be a battery for your dying lands? To sit in a cage and heal your fields? No, Rowan. And let me correct your fragile, foolish pride. This child isn't a human peasant. He is yours. He is the true heir to the Bloodstone throne, conceived the very night before you signed my execution decree and sentenced me to exile. But I will die before I let him be raised in your den of vipers. Rowan stared at her, utterly paralyzed. The realization hit him with the force of a falling mountain. The timeline, the vibrant, high alpha power he could now feel radiating from her belly now that he was close. It was his child, his son, the next Alpha King. Mine, Rowan whispered, his wolf roaring to life within his chest, demanding he claim his family and drag them back to the safety of his den. He reached out to grab her arm, his grip firm but incredibly careful not to hurt her delicate skin. You are coming back with me, Adelina. For the child's safety, if nothing else. Cassian knows you are alive, and he will hunt you to the ends of the earth to ensure his own claim to the throne remains unchallenged. Let go of me. Adelina struck his chest with her fist, her own wolf suddenly flaring to life in response to the physical restraint. The sudden, fiery burst of her dormant power caught Rowan off guard, breaking his grip. She turned to run toward the safety of the Crossroad Inn. But the sky suddenly darkened with an unnatural, shadowy mist that smelled of rot and dark magic. From the tree line, a dozen massive wolves with glowing crimson eyes emerged, surrounding them both in a tight, snapping circle. They were not Rowan's loyal royal guards. They were Cassian's personal, blood-sworn assassins. The crimson-eyed wolves moved with terrifying, unnatural synchronization, their jaws snapping as they formed a tightening circle of death around Rowan and Adelina. The air grew thick and cold, carrying the metallic tang of blood magic. From behind the pack of beasts, Lord Cassian walked out of the dark mist, holding a heavy steel crossbow loaded with a black-tipped, poisoned bolt. Brother, Cassian said, a mocking, triumphant smile on his lips. You really should have stayed at the Citadel. Hunting in the borderlands is a dangerous business for a king with so many enemies. Rowan stepped directly in front of Adelina, shielding her with his massive frame as he drew his broadsword. The silver blade hummed with a fierce, crackling alpha energy that cast a blue light across the dark path. Cassian, you dare commit high treason in the open? Treason is only a word written by the winners, Rowan. Cassian replied smoothly, adjusting his grip on the crossbow. He looked past Rowan's shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he took in Adelina's prominent belly. Well, it seems the stakes are much higher than I anticipated. An unborn heir. That changes things. The council will never support a king whose child is born of an exiled traitor. The council will support whoever holds the power. Rowan growled, his muscles tensing as he prepared to spring. Stand down, Cassian, and I might let you live out your days in a dungeon. Cassian chuckled, a dry, grating sound. The council? Rowan, who do you think funded my assassins? The elders don't want your line to continue. They want a king they can control, not an alpha who lets his heart rule his head. They gave me their blessing to clean up your mistakes. Adelina realized with a sickening chill that they were completely trapped. Rowan was a legendary warrior, but he couldn't fight off 12 elite, magically enhanced wolves, while simultaneously protecting a heavily pregnant woman who could barely run. Adelina. Rowan muttered out of the corner of his mouth, his eyes never leaving the lead wolf. When I charge, you run toward the apothecary. Valerie has a reinforced cellar. Hide there and lock the door. I am not leaving you to die, Rowan. She whispered back, her mind racing as she evaluated their surroundings. If you fall, they will find me in minutes anyway. We fight together, or we die together. Listen to me, Rowan hissed, his voice tight with desperation. Protect our son. With a thunderous roar that shook the trees, Rowan charged into the pack of assassins. His broadsword swung in a lethal, flashing arc, severing the throat of the first wolf that lunged. The battle quickly turned into a chaotic blur of blood, gray fur, and cold steel. Rowan fought with the ferocity of a demon. But the wolves were smart. They attacked in waves, wearing him down, while two shifted targets and darted straight toward Adelina. Adelina did not panic. She reached into her apothecary pouch, pulling out a handful of crushed silver root powder mixed with dried nightshade, a potent blind dust she had prepared for emergencies. As the first wolf lunged at her throat, its jaws wide, she threw the fine powder directly into its eyes and nose. The wolf shrieked, a horribly human sound, as the silver root burned through its sensitive nasal passages, blinding it instantly. It collapsed into the dirt, clawing at its own face. The second wolf hesitated, and in that split second of distraction, Rowan's broadsword pierced its ribs from behind. Rowan pulled the blade free, gasping for air. He had multiple deep bite wounds along his shoulders and thighs, his blood staining his midnight blue armor. He grabbed Adelina's hand, his grip warm and wet with blood. We have to go. More are coming from the western path. They fled into the deeper forest, leaving the border town behind, heading back toward the ancient, hidden mountain paths of the Bloodstone Peaks. It was the last place Cassian would expect them to hide. The lion's den itself. 2 days of brutal, agonizing trekking through the secret, rocky mountain passes brought them to the ancient ruins beneath the lunar citadel. Rowan was weak, his steps heavy and uneven, his veins running black with the poison that Cassian's wolves had laced on their claws. Adelina, exhausted and experiencing early, stress-induced contractions, had to support most of his weight, her shoulder bruised from his heavy armor. They hid in the catacombs, an ancient network of stone tunnels where the founders of the Bloodstone Pack were buried. The air here was heavy with the scent of old stone, cold water, and ancestral dust. We can't hide here forever, Adelina gasped, leaning against a massive stone sarcophagus as a sharp, agonizing pain rippled through her abdomen. She gripped her stomach, breathing heavily through the contraction. The baby. He's coming early, Rowan. The stress, it's triggering the labor. Rowan slid down the side of the sarcophagus, his face deathly pale, his black-veined neck showing the rapid spread of the toxin. He looked up at her, his silver eyes dulling but filled with a profound, heartbreaking remorse. I have ruined everything, he whispered. I destroyed our family because I trusted the wrong people. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Adelina. But please, Let me save our child." "How?" she asked, tears finally blurring her vision as she knelt beside him, pressing a cool, wet cloth to his burning forehead. "You are poisoned, and I can barely stand." "The ancient laws," Rowan said, coughing up dark, poisoned blood. "If an exiled member returns and demands a trial of blood before the Grand Assembly, the king, or the claimant, must grant it. The council cannot deny it without losing the loyalty of the lower-ranking wolves who still believe in the old ways. I will use the last of my strength to challenge Cassian. If I win, your exile is void, and our son is recognized. And if you lose, then you must use the secret passage behind the main altar to escape to the Western Sea." Rowan said, reaching up with a trembling hand to touch her cheek, his skin cold. "But you won't be alone. The spirits of the land will protect you if you claim them." Before she could answer, the heavy stone doors of the catacombs were blown inward with a deafening, concussive blast of magical energy. Cassian entered the tomb, flanked by the High Council elders and a dozen heavy, ironclad guards. "Found you," Cassian sneered, lowering his smoking ash staff. "The rat and his pregnant mate, hiding in the graves of our ancestors. How fitting." Adelina stood up slowly, her hands resting on her belly, stepping directly over Rowan's prone body. She drew upon every ounce of her noble training, her voice echoing with a surprising, authoritative resonance that filled the chamber. "I, Adelina of the House of Silverstream, return from exile to demand the trial of blood. I challenge the legitimacy of Lord Cassian and the High Council." The elders murmured in shock and hesitation. The chief elder, an old wizened wolf named Marcus, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "An exile has no right to demand a trial. She has every right." A powerful, commanding voice called out from the shadows of the entrance. An elderly woman clad in the heavy, silver-embroidered robes of the High Priestess stepped forward into the torchlight. It was Rowan's mother, Dowager Queen Elena, whom everyone believed had been secluded in a distant, silent monastery for years. She looked at Cassian with absolute, cold disgust. "Because she does not stand alone," Elena continued, holding up a massive, ancient leather ledger. "I have brought the True Pack ledgers from the secret archives. Cassian is not my late husband's son. He is the product of an affair between a rogue alpha and a disgraced maid. He has no royal blood and no claim to the throne. He poisoned my husband, the old king, and he poisoned Rowan's mind to usurp this crown." The hall erupted into a chaotic clamor. The guards looked at each other, their weapons lowering as the ultimate betrayal was revealed to the court. Cassian's face contorted into something monstrous, his handsome features twisting with pure, unbridled rage. "It doesn't matter," he screamed, drawing his sword. "The king is dying of poison anyway. I will take this throne by force, and anyone who stands against me will die in these tombs. Kill them all." Cassian roared to his personal loyalists, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the catacombs. The ancient tomb instantly turned into a chaotic slaughterhouse. Royal guards who remained loyal to Rowan's bloodline clashed with Cassian's rebel forces, the sound of clashing steel and snarling wolves filling the enclosed space. Dowager Queen Elena retreated toward the stone altar, shouting commands to the loyal pack soldiers. Adelina collapsed to her knees as a massive, agonizing contraction hit her like a tidal wave. She let out a sharp scream, her hands clawing at the stone floor. Her water had broken. The baby was coming now, right here in the middle of a brutal civil war. Rowan, hearing her scream of agony, felt something break inside his soul. The raw, instinctual need to protect his mate and child overrode the poison coursing through his veins. With a terrifying primal roar that shook the very foundation of the catacombs, he forced himself up. His skin began to glow with a faint, silver-white light as his high alpha blood fought back the dark toxin, burning it out of his system through sheer force of will. He intercepted an assassin who was lunging at Adelina, tearing the man's throat out with his bare teeth before retrieving his fallen broadsword. But the supernatural effort drained him. He fell back to one knee, using his sword to balance himself, his vision blurring as the darkness threatened to take him. Cassian saw his opportunity. He strode over the bodies, his blade raised high for the killing blow. Goodbye, brother. Your foolish reign ends in the dirt of our ancestors. Despite the agonizing labor pain ripping through her body, Adelina crawled toward the fallen sword of a dead rebel soldier. She refused to be a passive victim. She refused to let her child's father die. As Cassian brought his sword down toward Rowan's neck, Adelina lunged forward from the stone floor with a final, desperate burst of strength, driving the short blade deep into Cassian's calf. Cassian shrieked in pain, his strike missing Rowan's neck and instead slicing harmlessly through his shoulder armor. He stumbled back, clutching his heavily bleeding leg, looking down at Adelina with pure, murderous fury. "You miserable beast!" Before he could take another step, Rowan, fueled by a final burst of adrenaline and the raw desire to protect his mate, lunged forward. He drove his massive silver broadsword straight through Cassian's chest. Cassian froze, his eyes wide with shock as he looked down at the silver blade protruding from his torso. Rowan leaned in close, his voice a lethal, cold whisper. "You touched my family. That was your final mistake." Rowan twisted the blade, and Cassian collapsed to the stone floor, lifeless. The remaining rebel wolves, seeing their leader dead and his lineage exposed as a lie, threw down their weapons and surrendered. The High Council elders fell to their knees, weeping and begging for mercy from the bleeding, furious king. But Rowan didn't care about the elders or the crown. He dropped his sword and turned to Adelina, who was crying out in the final, agonizing stages of labor. Dowager Queen Elena rushed to her side, gently pushing Rowan away. "Get back, Rowan. You are covered in blood and poison. Let me handle this. Protect her from the drafts." Rowan watched from a short distance, his heart pounding in his chest, as Adelina gave one final, agonizing push. The sound of a sharp, loud cry echoed through the ancient stone catacombs, cutting through the silence of the aftermath like a ray of pure light. 3 weeks had passed since the bloody battle in the catacombs. The dark poison had been completely purged from Rowan's system by the pack's specialized healers, leaving only a few faint, silver scars across his chest. The spring sun was finally breaking through the heavy clouds over the northern peaks, and for the first time in months, the gray blight was receding from the forests. The spirit wells were running clear, cold, and vibrant once more, responding directly to the return of Adelina and the birth of the new, healthy heir. In the grand bedroom of the lunar citadel, Adelina sat by the large, arched window, cradling her beautiful baby boy. The child had tufts of dark hair and his father's striking, intelligent silver eyes. The heavy oak door opened quietly, and Rowan stepped inside. He had removed his royal crown and his heavy iron armor, wearing only a simple, comfortable white linen shirt. He looked vulnerable, stripped of his kingly bravado. He stopped a few paces away, as if afraid to encroach on her space or her peace. May I see him, Adelina?" Adelina looked at Rowan. She saw the deep, genuine remorse in his eyes, the absolute devotion and the profound understanding of the mistakes he had made. He had learned the hard way that a crown meant absolutely nothing if it required sacrificing the people who made the kingdom worth ruling in the first place. "Come here, Rowan," she said softly. Rowan approached slowly, his hands trembling as he gently looked down at his son. The baby reached out a tiny, perfect hand, his small fingers wrapping around Rowan's massive, calloused thumb. A single tear slipped down the Alpha King's cheek. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you, Adelina," Rowan whispered, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "I will abdicate the throne if you wish it. I will leave the pack and live in the borderlands if that is what it takes for you to truly forgive me." Adelina reached out, her hand resting gently on Rowan's shoulder, her fingers tracing the scar from the battle. "No, Rowan. The pack needs a king, but they do not need the old broken way of absolute rule. I will not return as your submissive queen, sitting in your shadow." Rowan looked up, his brow furrowing slightly in confusion. "What do you mean?" "We are going to dismantle the absolute power of the Alpha Crown," Adelina declared, her voice firm and full of vision. "The High Council of Greedy Elders will be replaced by a representative council from all ranks of wolves, including the Omegas and the Lowborn. We will rule together as equals, or we do not rule at all. No more secrets, no more sacrifices." Rowan looked up at her, his silver eyes shining with a profound, unbreakable respect and awe. She had left the pack with absolutely nothing, and now she had returned to completely reshape their entire world. "As you wish, my queen," Rowan said, leaning forward to gently press his lips against her hand, and then against the forehead of their sleeping son. Together, the realm of the Bloodstone Pack was no longer a place of fear and blind obedience. A new dawn had arrived, forged through betrayal, saved by sacrifice, and ruled by love. The emotional journey of Adelina and Rowan shows us that true strength doesn't come from a crown or absolute power, but from the resilience of the heart and the willingness to protect those we love at any cost. Adelina faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged as the true savior of her people, proving that a mother's love and a leader's integrity can rewrite destiny itself. Thank you so much for reading this epic journey of love, redemption, and royal intrigue. If you were captured by Adelina's fierce spirit and Rowan's journey to redemption, please like this story, leave a comment with your favorite chapter, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more addictive, cinematic romance stories. Your support helps our library grow.